What happens to a man who takes a vow of poverty and then turns out to be extraordinarily good at making money? He does not get poorer. He builds the most profitable agricultural business in the kingdom, and he builds it on prayer. But the thing that makes him rich is the same thing that erases him, and he will not see it coming for 400 years. You are not the abbot. The abbot prays, receives kings, and signs what you put in front of him. You are the cellarer. You hold the keys, the tally sticks, and the ledger. Every sack of wool that leaves this house, every bushel of grain that goes through the mill, every shilling borrowed and every shilling owed. It passes across your desk before it passes through the gate. And what you are running, behind the silence and the stone, is a business. A very large one. So let's do what nobody in this building is willing to do out loud. Let's open the books. Start with the thing that makes you different from every lord in the shire. A secular lord dies. When he dies, his land splits between his heirs. His widow takes her third, the crown takes its dues, and his son inherits a smaller estate than his father held. 3 generations of that, and a great family is a modest one. This is the ordinary physics of medieval wealth. Everything that goes up comes apart. Your house does not die. You are not a man. You are a legal person that never ages, never marries, never divides an estate, and never pays a death duty. Land that enters this monastery enters permanently. A widow grants you a mill for the good of her husband's soul. A knight leaving for crusade signs over 200 acres and never returns. A dying merchant buys prayers with a manor. None of it ever leaves again. 400 years of that, compounding, with no exit. That is the first engine, and it is quiet, and it is relentless. The second engine is your labor. You do not hire your workforce, you recruit it. The men who work your fields are lay brothers, the conversi. They are not monks. They are usually illiterate. They live in separate quarters. They eat plainer food, and they will never be ordained. They take vows, and in exchange for those vows they receive food, clothing, a bed, and the promise that the work of their hands counts as worship. What they do not receive is a wage. Understand what this means on your ledger. Your neighbor, the lord across the river, is competing for scarce labor in an open market and paying whatever that market demands. You are not in that market. Your workforce is bound by conscience rather than contract. It does not negotiate. It does not leave for better terms at harvest time. And it costs you food and cloth instead of silver. The third engine is tax. Not the absence of it. You pay tax, we will come back to that, and it is what eventually kills you. But you carry an exemption your competitors do not. As a Cistercian house, you are excused from paying tithes on the produce of land you cultivate yourself. 10% of your own output, which every other producer in the region surrenders, stays inside your walls. 10% permanently on everything you grow. That is not a subsidy, that is a structural margin advantage, and there is no way for a secular lord to match it. Now put the 3 together: permanent ownership, unwaged labor, a protected margin. You will not out-innovate your competitors. You do not need to. You will simply outlast them, outscale them, and outprice them for 200 years without ever raising your voice. So what does that engine produce when you let it run? Look at the Abbey of Bury St. Edmunds. In the Domesday Survey of 1086, the abbey holds land in more than 230 separate places across eastern England. Not 230 fields. 230 communities, each with its own tenants, its own rents, its own obligations flowing back to one building in Suffolk. The abbot of that house is not a spiritual figure with a garden. He is one of the largest landholders in the kingdom, and he answers to almost nobody between himself and the king. Then look north at what the Cistercians do with the same model in country nobody else wants. Fountains Abbey is founded in a wooded valley in Yorkshire, deliberately in the wilderness, deliberately away from towns. Within a century, it is running the largest wool operation in England. By the middle of the 13th century, Fountains grazes something on the order of 18,000 sheep. Reavolks, down the road, runs around 14,000. And these flocks are not standing on a single estate. They are distributed across a network of granges, outlying farms, each with its own barns, its own lay brothers, its own accounts, each close enough that a man can travel there and back within a day's journey. Sheep on the high moors, grain on the good soil, lead mines, horse studs, fish ponds, quarries, tanneries. You are not running a farm, you are running a portfolio. And here is the part that turns a large farm into an actual industry. You do not just produce wool, you process it. The fleece comes off the sheep on your moor, travels to your grange, is sorted and graded in your wool house. and in some cases washed and fulled in your own mill before it ever meets a buyer. Every stage that would have been someone else's margin is your margin instead. By the late 13th century, England is shipping something in the region of 30,000 sacks of wool a year to the continent. A single sack weighs 364 pounds of raw fleece. Flemish weavers and Florentine bankers cannot get enough of it, and the finest of it does not come from the great secular estates. It comes from the monasteries. There is a Florentine merchant's handbook from the 14th century, written by an agent of the Bardi banking house, that lists English religious houses one after another with the grade and the price of the wool each one produces. Not the towns, not the lords. The abbeys, by name, ranked like stock. That is your position in the market. Foreign bankers, hundreds of miles away, know the name of your house and what your fleece is worth. You have taken a vow of poverty. You are on a Florentine price list. So the business is magnificent, which raises the obvious question. If you are producing at that scale, with no wages and a protected margin, why are you always short of silver? Because of what your money is made of. Your wealth is land, buildings, livestock, and mills. It is real, it is enormous, and it is almost impossible to convert into coin quickly. You cannot sell half a mill. You cannot liquidate a grange in a fortnight without accepting a humiliating price. And meanwhile, the demands on you are relentless and they arrive in cash. The roof of the church needs lead. The great tower is settling and needs rebuilding. The king is traveling north and intends to stay 3 nights with a retinue of 200 at your expense, and you may not refuse him. There is a lawsuit over a boundary that has been running for 11 years. A dozen poor families at the gate expect to be fed today, because that is what you are for. None of that waits for the wool clip. So you do what any asset-rich, cash-poor business does. You borrow. And because the church forbids the open charging of interest, you and your lenders develop something more elegant. You sell your wool before it exists. An Italian merchant comes to the gate and offers you silver today for the fleece of next summer's shearing. You take it because you need it today. Then the following year the roof still leaks and the king still visits, so you sell the year after that. Then 3 years forward. Then 5. In some cases, houses contract away their entire clip for a decade ahead. Look closely at what you have just done. You have not borrowed money. On the ledger, you have simply made a sale in advance. But the price you accepted was well below what that wool would have fetched at market, and that discount is the interest. It is not called interest. It does not appear as interest. It is buried in the gap between what your wool was worth and what you agreed to take for it. You have invented a debt that leaves no fingerprints, and now the arithmetic turns against you. Because you have already sold next year's wool, next year's clip brings in nothing. So next year, to cover next year's costs, you must sell the year after. The obligation walks ahead of you and you never catch it. You are farming to satisfy contracts signed by men who are already dead. Worse, the contract specifies sacks, not money sacks. If disease thins your flock, if the winter is savage, if the fleece comes in light, you owe the same weight of wool regardless. And you must go into the open market and buy wool at full price to deliver it. A bad year does not reduce your obligation. It multiplies it. There is a second instrument, and it is even more seductive. You sell corrides. A wealthy man pays you a large sum now, and in return your house feeds, houses, and care for him for the rest of his life. It is a retirement contract, and the lump sum arrives exactly when you need it. You have just sold an annuity, and you have no idea how long he will live. He may live 30 years. He may bring servants. He may be difficult. Meanwhile, the money he paid you was spent on the tower in the first 18 months, and you will be feeding him at your own cost every day for 3 decades. Fountains, the richest Cistercian house in England, runs into exactly this wall. The evidence sits in the tax records. The assessment on the abbey's temporal property falls from £343 at the end of the 13th century to £243 a generation later. By the 1330s, the house is no longer generating a surplus at all. It is borrowing, the largest wool producer in England, running out of money. And there is one more pressure, and this one comes from a direction you did not expect. In 1279, Edward I enacts the Statute of Mortmain. From now on, land may not be granted to the church without a royal license. Read that as the Crown reads it. Your greatest engine, permanent accumulation, land in and never out, has just been noticed. Not taxed yet. Noticed. The state has looked at the thing that makes you rich and put a hand on it. That is the first move in a game that ends 2.5 centuries later. Now the 14th century arrives, and it takes the business apart in 3 blows. The first is weather. Between 1315 and 1317 it rains across northern Europe in a way nobody living has seen. Grain rots in the field 2 years running. Then disease moves through the flocks and the herds. Sheep die of liver rot. Cattle die in a panzootic that sweeps the country. You are a producer of wool and grain, and in the space of 5 years both fail. The second blow is the Scots. If you are in the north, raiding parties burning granges that took 80 years to build. And the third blow is 1348. The plague reaches England, and within 2 years it kills somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of the population. That is a demographic event, but for you it is something more specific and more fatal. It kills the conversi. The lay brothers die in enormous numbers, and this is the part that finishes the model. They are not replaced. The young men who would have taken those vows in the previous century now have other options, because with half the workforce dead, wages for free labor have doubled. Why would a man surrender his liberty for bread and a bed when he can be paid actual silver to do the same work and go home at night? The recruitment pipeline that built your empire simply dries up, and with it goes the entire competitive advantage. Look at what you were. A producer with unwaged labor and a protected margin, undercutting every lord in the region. Take away the unwaged labor, and you are just a landowner with a lot of empty granges and no one to work them. So you do the only thing available. You stop farming. You lease the granges out to tenant farmers and take rent. You lease the mills to millers and take rent. The dormitories built for 200 lay brothers stand mostly empty, and you convert what you can into private lodgings. Over roughly a century, the most sophisticated agricultural enterprise in England quietly transforms into something much simpler and much more ordinary: a landlord. Understand what this means, because it is the hinge of the whole story. By 1400, the machine described in the first half of this video no longer exists. The tithe exemption on land you cultivate is worth very little when you no longer cultivate. The vertical integration is gone. The granges belong to your tenants in everything but name. What is left is rent, a predictable, unglamorous, and above all countable stream of income arriving from several hundred separate holdings. You have spent 150 years turning a complicated business into a simple one, and a simple one is very much easier to value. So let's do what the crown is about to do. Let's put a number on you. Take a middling house, not Fountains, not Bury, a respectable provincial abbey with a few dozen manors, a handful of mills, a decent flock, and a shrine that draws pilgrims. The kind of place that makes up the bulk of English monasticism. In a good year, the gross income comes in at roughly £400. Rents from the leased manors are the bulk of it, and they are reliable. Mill tolls add to it. The remaining wool clip you still manage directly adds more. Pilgrim offerings at the shrine add a little and vary wildly with the weather and the roads. Now the deductions, because this is where houses die. Repairs to the church and the estate buildings, stone and lead are brutally expensive and the fabric never stops decaying. Corrides. The men you sold retirement contracts to years ago, still eating at your table. Pensions to former servants. Fees to the lawyers running your perpetual boundary disputes. Alms at the gate, which are not optional. Hospitality, which is not optional either. The wages of the free laborers you now have to pay, because the lay brothers are gone. After all of it, you clear something in the region of £240. That is your good year. £240 of clear annual value. It is a solid, unremarkable, entirely survivable number, and you have run on something close to it for 4 generations. Now the bad year. The wool price on the continent softens. Say it takes a quarter off that line. The grain harvest is poor, so your tenants come to you asking for rent relief, and you grant some of it because a ruined tenant pays nothing at all next year either. A storm takes part of the church roof and the repair cannot wait a season, because water in the fabric costs 10 times more later than it does now. Your income falls. Your costs do not. The Corrodians eat exactly as much in a bad year. The lawyers bill exactly the same. The poor at the gate arrive in greater numbers, not fewer, and turning them away is the one thing you genuinely cannot do without destroying the reason you exist. You clear £190. That is not a catastrophe. It is a bad year. Every business has them. In any other century, you tighten the belt, defer the tower, and wait for the wool price to recover. But it is not any other century. It is the 1530s. And that 50-pound swing has just become the difference between existing and not existing. In 1534, Henry VIII breaks with Rome and makes himself head of the church in England. The money that used to flow to the papacy now flows to him, and he legislates a permanent annual tax of 1/10 of the net income of every religious house in the country, 10% every year, forever. To collect it, he needs to know what everyone is worth. So in 1535, commissioners fan out across England to conduct the most comprehensive audit of ecclesiastical wealth ever attempted in these islands. The Valor Ecclesiasticus. They arrive at your gate, and they are not interested in your relics or your library or the age of your foundation. They want the rent roll, manor by manor, mill by mill, holding by holding, income in, deductions out, net value at the bottom. This is the moment 4 centuries of accumulation becomes a single number on a page. And remember what you did in the 15th century. You simplified. You stopped being a complicated producer and became a straightforward landlord. Rents are the easiest income on earth to audit because somebody else has already counted them for you. Your tenants know exactly what they pay. The commissioners simply ask them. There is nothing to hide because you spent 100 years making your income legible. The following year, 1536, Parliament passes the Act for the suppression of the lesser monasteries. And it draws a line, £200. Any religious house whose clear annual value falls below £200 is dissolved. Its land goes to the crown. Its buildings are stripped. Its community is broken up, the head of the house pensioned off, the rest sent to a larger monastery or out into the world, £200. Now go back to your ledger. Good year 240. Bad year 190. The line does not run between the wealthy and the poor. It runs directly through the middle of a normal harvest cycle. Houses that had been solvent for 300 years find that the year the commissioners happened to arrive was a wet one, and that is the entire difference. The official justification is spiritual, that small houses have fallen into laxity and the religious life is better preserved in great ones. The mechanism is arithmetic. Roughly 300 houses fall below the line and are gone within 2 years. Not for corruption, not for heresy, not for failure, for being under a number. So the great abbeys watch it happen and the great abbeys are relieved. Fountains is far above the line. Bury St. Edmunds is far above the line. Glastonbury, Westminster, St. Albans, none of them are anywhere near £200. The Act says so explicitly. The religious life will be better maintained in the great and solemn monasteries. They read that as protection. Some of them are handed the confiscated lands of their smaller neighbors. They have 3 years, because the line was never a judgment about size. It was a demonstration that the thing could be done at all, that a monastery could be assessed, valued, dissolved and absorbed without the sky falling in, without a rebellion the crown could not put down, without the wealth of the country collapsing. The small houses proved the method. The large ones were the point. Between 1538 and 1540, one by one, the great abbeys surrender. Some are pressured, some are bargained with, some abbots are hanged. By the spring of 1540, there is not a single functioning monastery left in England. And here is the shape of it, the thing worth taking away. The small house died because it was too small to clear the threshold. The great house died because it was too large to leave alone. There was no size at which you were safe. £200 was not a floor protecting the strong. It was the first cut, and every house in England was on the same side of the blade. The advantage was always the vulnerability. Permanent ownership meant 400 years of accumulated land that could be seized in an afternoon. Fixed assets meant wealth that could not be moved, hidden, or converted. Legibility, the clean rent roll, the tidy accounts, the very competence that kept you solvent, meant the crown could value you precisely and take exactly what was there. Everything that made the business work is what made it collectible. You were never running a monastery. You were running the largest, oldest, and least mobile balance sheet in the kingdom, and you were running it in a country whose government would eventually need money more than it needed God. The vow of poverty was kept, in a sense. Not one of those monks owned a thing. The corporation owned everything, and the corporation had no defense, because a legal person that never dies also never learns to run. You spent 400 years proving you could generate a surplus. The state was only ever waiting for the total.